Is it recording? All right, welcome everyone. I will open us up for the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal session for October 17th, 2024. It is 10:01 and I will go ahead and lead us in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome. Okay, anything to add to calendar? We do have an executive session immediately following this formal session.
Correct.
Was there one other?
One other item it's a calendaring, but I think I mentioned in a email communication the need for we need to do a public hearing and adopt a supplemental budget for our ARPA funds. And I would like to go ahead and put that on the calendar for either next Thursday or the following Thursday. I need to look at publishing because I need to publish a notice for the hearing. And I just wanted to see if get the green light before I do the notice and everything else and start getting that put together.
You're thinking during, or is it right after?
It'd be part of that formal session. So either the 24th or the 31st. I just need to look. I need to make sure that I have sufficient time that I can get it published in the news register.
I think it was, wasn't it 7 days?
It's 5.
5 days?
Mm-hmm.
Do we need a budget committee convened for that?
No.
Okay, well, either one. I mean, we
Okay.
don't have any.
I mean, I'll try to, I just need to look at notice timelines. I have to kind of work backwards from that and just wanted to, if it's okay with the board, we'll go ahead and start the noticing process and have that information ready. Because it's going to modify the budget or that fund by more than 10%, we have to do a public hearing before we can before you can consider adopting the supplemental budget. Yeah. So,
Okay, yeah, I think that sounds good. Either one.
okay.
Okay. Anything else for calendar?
No.
Do we have all of the November AOC meetings on there?
Yes.
I'm assuming you guys know about all those.
Mhm.
Okay. The conference. Yeah,
Mm. So
which
those-
conflicts, I think, with one of our formal sessions.
Right, so that's
Oh.
been canceled.
Okay.
And then Thanksgiving, so that's.
Yeah, typically, there's not a formal session that week at AOC conference. And then, yeah, so there'll be 2 weeks. I'm trying to think, I think it's November 21st
And the 28th.
and the 28th. We won't have formal sessions, one because of AOC conference, the second one because of Thanksgiving.
Okay. Okay. All right, so if there's nothing else for calendar, item D is public comment. This time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. So if you're in the audience for public comment, please come forward now, or if you're online, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, hearing none. We will move on to, excuse me, item E is our department update. We have 2 today. The first one was at our request from last week, and that is by our county clerk, Carrie Hinton. Welcome, Carrie. And we had some discussion last week about concerns around the election and just questions that were floating out there, especially when it comes to the voter rolls and having people that shouldn't be voting that are on the rolls and the statewide discovery. So you've had a chance to sort of brush up on the discussion, and we're looking forward to getting an update. So
Good
welcome.
morning.
Morning.
So as you know, we're just 19 days away from the general election on November 5th. And obviously preparations have been underway for quite some time. We've been doing a lot of additional security protocols, trainings, and we're anticipating close to or around an 80% turnout.
Nice.
So we've been inundated with calls and updates to voter registration records for the last 2 weeks now, and they just keep rolling in. So Tuesday was the last day to register as a brand new voter. And after the deadline to register to vote, we had over 300 online voter registrations yesterday that were not all brand new, but every single one has to be carefully looked at. So we've been busy getting all of those voter records updated, which is part of our normal process on a regular day for keeping our voter rolls accurate and clean. But obviously at a time like this, when there's deadlines, then it's just tripled the workload. Yesterday, ballots began to be mailed, and this is per statute ORS 254.470. And we've received numerous phone calls asking why the ballots hadn't been mailed yet. And if this was a new law and something new, and it's not, this is the time frame that we always operate under because it's under statute. Voter pamphlets were mailed out last week and were delivered to each household regardless of whether or not there's a registered voter there. All 16 ballot boxes opened up yesterday, and you can access our website to find a ballot box near you. It's a little fancy map now, so you can type in your address and it'll show which one's closest to you. We will be conducting our public certification test of the vote tally system on October 21st at 9 a.m. And more details for that can be found on our website. It's our logic and accuracy test. Recently, as you all became aware, and as was mentioned last week, a DMV data entry error was discovered. So I just wanted to give a brief recap of those events and give you a little bit of a timeline so you can kind of see where counties are at in that process. So Yamhill County Elections was initially notified on September 13th by the Secretary of State that there were potential non-USA citizens registered to vote in Yamhill County as a result of a data entry error at the DMV. In this initial information received, there were 4 records identified in Yamhill County, all with no voting history. We promptly took action and followed guidance from the Secretary of State's office to correct these records and ensure that no ballot was issued. Individuals were notified of the error and instructions were provided, giving them the opportunity to re-register if they could confirm their eligibility and show their citizenship. A deeper review of records performed by the DMV resulted in a second set of records being identified on September 23rd, which resulted in 23 additional records in Yamhill County, again with no voting history found. The directed steps were once again taken to reach out to these individuals and follow the appropriate steps. On October 7th, Yamhill County was notified of 12 additional non-USA citizens that were registered to vote, again with no voting history. And the directed steps were once again followed. All of the identified records have been flagged to provide a second layer of security to ensure any ballots from this group that may have been sent out or generated are not counted without first verifying eligibility. This corrective action taken ensures this error will not have any impact on the 2024 election. On October 9th, the Oregon Association of County Clerks issued a press release expressing our commitment to secure and transparent elections while continuing to prioritize the integrity of elections here in Oregon. And we will continue to follow state and federal laws, counting every eligible ballot cast in each election while keeping and maintaining safeguards so ineligible ballots are not counted. The next steps that have already been put into motion is that the governor has already directed DMV to pause the process of automatically registering drivers to vote through the state's motor voter law. The governor and the Secretary of State have called for an independent external performance audit of the motor voter process. The DMV has also released an after-action report which details how the error occurred and the corrective actions steps that they are taking to ensure accuracy going forward. Since there are additional corrective steps being taken as well as an audit, we don't have any additional information available at this time. But as the process is continued to be reviewed, I'm sure there will be more information shared with us once that is completed. I want to again assure voters, this will not impact the 2024 general election. And as the Yamhill County Clerk, I will continue to be vigilant to ensure the election process is safe, secure, and transparent. If we receive any additional records or notices, we will continue to respond promptly and follow the directed steps. If anyone ever has any evidence of a person who may be unlawfully registered to vote, please send that to our office immediately, and we will definitely take that very seriously, and we will look into it. On a positive note, I wanted to let you all know that November 4th is Election Hero Day. And as you know, counties across the state are putting in tremendous amount of time and staff, in addition to our election heroes who are our volunteers that come for a few days to help us out with all of this. And their tremendous contributions should not be ignored. And the intensity of this year is they're taking the brunt of that for all of us.
Yep.
And we all want to make sure that it's a safe and accessible voting experience for all. We cannot conduct an event of this magnitude in the face of immense pressure without them. And their hard work and dedication play a crucial role in this process. So thank you.
Thank you. A couple questions. So you are kind of at the mercy of the state, the Secretary of State, going through the entire file, the statewide file, looking for these anomalies and double checking with whatever parameter they have to identify people who are not legal citizens. And then they're pushing that information out to counties, correct? There's nothing you can do individually as Yamhill County to identify these people.
Not with this error that occurred, no. And I believe it was DMV that is providing those records to the state, who's then pushing them out to us. So
Okay.
they did their DMV reviewed, went back and reviewed the ones that were pushed through under Oregon motor voter law.
Okay. So the problem voters or voter, I don't know what you call them, problem voters are the ones who came from motor voter.
Yes, that was the root cause, was DMV.
Okay. And that could include when they sign up 16-year-olds and then roll them forward onto the rolls when they turn 18. Because they're also a motor
It just
voter.
depends on the transaction at the DMV. If that non-citizen or the citizenship box was checked and they inadvertently did not receive that proof, they may have shown proof on that box. It's just, that's what we're trying to dig through right now. And that's why we are making sure to really stress that when they were at the DMV, it was a non-citizen transaction that could have taken place. But we want them to be given the chance that if that situation has changed, if they become citizens since then, or if they were citizens at the time and it just was the wrong box checked, that they're given that opportunity to come in and prove that to us.
Okay.
And as of October 7th, the last publicly released numbers show that of the 10 originally identified records who had voting history, 5 had already come forward and shown citizenship proof. And that was 10 records out in the state. And
Okay.
I haven't heard any update on those numbers yet.
So the rolling updates are because they just don't have time to get through the whole thing in one swoop, or they are trying to contact these individuals?
I believe initially when they found the errors, we were given a set of data, correct? And then on September 23rd, after they dug deeper, it was a deeper dive that they went in. That's when they found additional records that needed reviewed.
Okay. So you said there's a total of 39
Yes,
people in
that were
Yamhill County.
affected, and none of them had a voting history.
Okay. So then what do? You just remove them from your list?
We have,
Okay.
yeah, those have all been corrected and they are not in our system as an active registered voter.
Okay. And then if they find more, let's say next week, and we have 5 of them in Yamhill County, but they've already had ballots go out to them, do you have a way to flag that when they come
Yes.
back? Okay.
Yes, all of them have been flagged, whether a ballot was issued during this time frame or not, because obviously right now is when we are issuing the ballots.
Yeah.
So most of these were caught before we issued any ballots. Any that may have been at the tail end, they're all inactivated.
Okay. Um, okay, any other questions? I want to make sure
Yeah, I do.
questions answered.
I think you probably already answered it, but short of getting notification from the state that these are challenged voters in our county, you would have had no way of knowing that these 39 voters should not have been registered.
Correct.
So there is really nothing you're saying we can do at the county level to make sure that folks that have a legal status can't or otherwise cannot vote. There is no other way for us to cure that.
With the way the process is set up right now, the county does not have a way of knowing. Hopefully, once this whole review and audit is done, there will be better mechanisms and better security put in place and processes put in place so that those could be identified.
So we're depending on the folks at DMV to give us accurate information.
Yes.
And this is self-reporting from DMV. A little editorial comment here. DMV is, as are most state agencies, not really been up to the task of self-policing and giving us accurate information. So basically, we've got mail-in ballots, which are just rife for fraud. We now have the state saying, well, we're going to use taxpayer money, so you don't even have to use a stamp. There's no ID required, and we don't even know how many more people are on this DMV list, not to mention the other avenues of registering to vote without being legal. So really, in the state of Oregon, and there's nothing you can do about it, other than we look at a legislative fix that says, we need to look at some of this because we have every single possible hole for voter fraud. If it weren't for what you and Kara and everybody in your office are doing, which is you're doing yeoman's work of trying to just get through all this and keep it on the up and up. And I've seen you do that. We also know we've had clean audits from the Secretary of State's office forever. I mean, they look deep into the system and we've never seen anything that was anything but 100% clean audit. So thank you for that. Thank you for what you're doing. But I think the bigger message here is the state of Oregon needs to get its act together because it's just, we're asking for the fraud that has been brought to us. Imagine if we didn't know.
I think the DMV after action report gives a very detailed, deep dive look even into their computer systems. It shows screens, they explain it very well as to what a human was seeing when someone came in to initiate a transaction at the counter with the DMV, and then what steps they've taken to change those screens so that those kinds of things can be handled correctly from the very beginning. But I think that after all of this is said and done, and once we can get through this audit, then there will be definitely more steps taken to ensure that the integrity of our voting system is up to what it should be.
How are you addressing concerns at the local level? Because obviously I'm sure you're fielding lots of questions from folks who go, hey, how do I know you're cleaning things up on your end?
We just reassure them that our processes and the things that we're doing in our office is exactly, we're following everything the Secretary of State has instructed. We're following all the statutes, all the federal laws as well. And we are daily cleaning up voter rolls, so to speak, because we do not let anything go untouched. Any record that comes into our office is physically reviewed by an individual. And even ones that we question or not sure what that person is trying to update or change, we contact them, we send a letter, we are following up constantly. We receive constant requests or records through email, phone, online. Over the counter, people come in and hand us voter registration cards, and every single one of them is being looked at, scrutinized.
Your relationship with the Secretary of State's office, have they had any concerns, complaints, issues with what's going on at the Yamhill County Clerk's office?
None at all.
Good to know. Thank you.
We had a discussion prior to the budget meeting in May about your concerns and your anticipated needs for this election specifically, and your desire to want to ramp up and make sure you could cover staffing levels. And I am so glad that we made that decision in the budget meetings. We had to make some tough internal decisions about how to shift money to several different departments. One of them was yours. And the purpose of that decision was to make sure that you did have the resources that you need to conduct this election. So I'm proud of not only my colleagues for making that decision, but also the Citizen Budget Committee members as well, that they recognize that. And you said it yourself, that this election in particular it's intense, and it has been intense in the months leading up to November. So we appreciate everything that your team is doing. And thank you for providing an extra layer of confidence, because there are a lot of questions when we see these headlines coming out on the state level. And it's just, most people are scratching their heads saying, well, how come they weren't communicating with DMV to begin with? You know, there has to be a desire for clean voting rolls to begin with, and it just wasn't happening. So that's not in your control, but we appreciate the time that you've taken to answer those questions.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. We have another department update from our county assessor, Derek Wharf. Welcome, Derek.
Derek?
Elections and taxes, there's no softballs today. Thank you. Little housekeeping. I do have some handouts that are my talking points that keep the numbers in check, because there's a lot of numbers to talk about today when we're talking taxes and distribution and levy. Would you guys like a copy of those just to follow along, if you will?
Yes, please.
Secondly, the delightful aroma coming from the room next door is our 12th annual chili
Cook
cook-off.
off, all right, nice.
Oh, yeah?
I thought you
What's
were,
going on over there? The
I-
hallways a buzz with what's happening.
I thought you were just making us lunch because you were coming and you were gonna be here for lunch.
There's only 12 chilies. I'm sure they'll serve all the rest of the day.
I figured you'd be here through lunch.
Yeah. Oh, look at this.
Hi, welcome.
And my second housekeeping meeting, our thing. You know, we don't get a lot of time in front of commissioners, and everyone's busy and trying to get to all the departments to say hello and do meet and greets. Somewhat infrequently, but occasionally you guys have stopped by our office. I did ask my management team to be in the audience today, and I just want to do a quick introduction of them, give them some heads up there. So in the far corner there is Jeff Ivy, our deputy assessor. Patty Lansdale next to Jeff is our senior office administrator. Eileen Slater is our deputy tax collector, and Jay on the end is our chief appraiser.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Morning.
And the work they supervise all culminates in what we're talking about today. So we work throughout the year to really get to the last 2 weeks and then prepare ourselves for the next 6 weeks. The department, and for those that don't know, my name is Derek Wharf. I'm the elected county assessor, and I'm also the department head for assessment and taxation for Yamhill County. So in our department, we have 3 divisions. We have the appraisal and valuation. That's the first part of the process, is putting value on property. And the next division, if you will, within the department is the tax group, which does levying, tax billing, collections, and maybe most important, distributions. So if we've collected the funds. And then the third leg of the stool is our cartography with some GIS. That is cadastral mapping that keeps track of ownership records of the tax lots. We process deeds for sales, and then when the ownership changes from one person to the next, we keep the official record of the ownership based on tax lots. So those are our three major groups. And as I go through here, I'll stop after appraisal. I'll give you an update on what we're doing on the appraisal team. If you have any questions at that point, I'm glad to answer them. Like I said, there's quite a few numbers in here, but I think that's really what establishes the gravity of what we do when we start to wrap our heads around, you know, the not only the dollars, but the volume and what's asked of this department. So the appraisal team, we've got roughly 50,000 accounts. It's approaching 50. It's in that 48 to 50. There's some exemptions and some untaxable accounts in there. If they're below threshold, they kind of fall off. But for general awareness, we're about 50,000 accounts. Right now, or I should say, we certified the roll October 9th. Yes, verified by Eileen. And the real market value of the county was right at 29 billion. So that's not the taxable value, that's the real market value. The amount we impose taxes on is more like 13 billion, 12 and a half or 13 billion. But when we're out there doing appraisal work and we're picking up property, the values that we certify every year, real market values, are approaching 29 billion. Last year, we did 3,500 property inspections for new construction. So the two categories that we appraise are brand new construction, new homes, new additions, GPB buildings, commercial buildings, whatever it is that gets erected new. We are out there to do an inspection on. We had 3,500 of those. That's 875 per appraiser. And we added $540 million to the tax roll. That's down a little bit. The last 4 years have been closer to 600 million. We're down a little bit there. I think that's just some slowing in new housing starts, but the other sectors seem to be performing. So industrial, commercial, there has been a slowing of multifamily, but we had a huge influx of multifamily 3-4 years ago. And so they're fully online now. There's still a couple of large complexes being built out in Newburgh at the Crestview Crossing, and then some over here by the hospital that will come on in the next year or two in terms of multifamily.
The question, Stratus Village isn't going to be paying taxes, is it?
That's
Housing Authority?
that's owned by, I think,
Housing Authority.
Housing Authority. No, that one will be exempt. Although I think there's some clarification needed on the two developments happening. So there's two development, we're referring to the one behind Comfort Inn, or by the hospital and behind Comfort
It's
Inn.
the Housing Authority with tribal money and
Yeah.
OHCS and county
Yeah.
money.
Yeah, that one's just breaking ground in the front towards the highway there. There's another one that was being built behind that's sort of southwest of the hospital a little bit, almost adjacent to their parking lot. That one I do not believe is part of the Housing Authority. So two large housing improvements going in there. One will be exempt.
Okay.
The Housing Authority one will be. There's a law for that even the interim portion of building, it's exempt once owned by them. So
Okay.
yeah, we will be working with Roxanne Henderson, who is our exemption specialist on that property. If not for 1/1 of 25, definitely for 26. It looks like they're doing infrastructure right now. They're doing piping and,
Right.
streets and whatnot. So after we do new construction, then it's reappraisal. So we're out there looking at properties. I think in years past, you've heard us say that we haven't been to some properties in 25 years. We needed more stuff. I'm very proud to say that our office has turned that corner, and with the help of this team that I recognize behind me and our staff back in the office, we have closed that gap. We've been to every property in Yamhill County in the last 5 years since we started that initiative. And now it's a matter of just keeping it on a cycle so we don't fall behind. And we're revisiting in our reappraisal effort this year. We went back to the cities of Amity, Carlton, Yamhill, and Dayton. And then we had another little cleanup section in the southern part of the county also, but that'll be ongoing. So next year, after we pick up all the new construction, then your appraisers are out there looking to see what's happened to the existing inventory, whether it got torn down, whether, somebody built without a permit, unfortunately, or what happened. We just have to keep on top of inventory so we don't get behind. That's the reappraisal effort that happens after the new construction. The other piece I'd mentioned on the appraisal team is valuation appeals. So tax bills are in the mail. We will start the appeal season. We have year over year steadily declined in the number of appeals we have. When I started in 2012, there were probably 300 that made it to BOPTA, with 1,000 being reviewed internally. And last year it was maybe 10 or 12. So I like to think that's a better appraisal process and transparency and education to our citizens when they come in with the initial concern over value. But at the end of the day, that number has dropped. What hasn't dropped is the impact of large appeals. So we had a couple of appeals over the prior 2 years that were out of our control. They were handled by the state, Comcast statewide. They had a huge appeal and had a large value impact on the decision. But more recently, in the last 3, now this year will be 4, we've had appeals from Lowe's Improvement retailer. They have appealed everything statewide. In fact, over the number of 5 or 6 years, maybe 10, they've appealed nationally. So they're looking for a new appraisal concept to be accepted by state tax courts to allow for a reduction in their tax bill. I mean, I don't want to get into the details because it's complicated, but know that this group, the appraisal team, represents Yamhill County both at the local level when we have our what used to be called BOPTA and now is going to be called Property Valuation Appeal Board. Got to rename. We also represent the county at the Magistrate Division and the Tax Court Division. And Tax Court is where this Lowe's appeal is now. And my hope is that with our case and possibly another case from Multnomah County, that we'll be able to set a state precedent on the valuation approach and the appraisal theory to solidify statewide how these big box retailers are being assessed. And there's a lot of money at stake. It's 1.3 billion in assessed value. We happen to only have 1 or 2 considered big box retailers, so it's not it'll be notable, but statewide it's got a bigger impact. So our effort to get a decision out of tax court really stems to the whole system. But those sorts of appeals, in years past, it's been more local accounts. We've appealed the steel mill. We've appealed other property that we have to defend. So just know that your appraisal team does valuation, reevaluation, and then we defend appeals. So
Is that something that we have to litigate? Is that coming out?
yes.
So-
Well, I wish Jody was here because I have big kudos to her. She's my she's my beacon.
We can
she's my-
certainly get her over here.
Well, if we need to, she's my legal beacon. She loves to be celebrated. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. When I get into the formalities of court documents and I'm like, what is this even supposed to look like? Because I'll get a motion for I don't even know what they're talking about, because these national firms are appealing. So they've got a team. It's not infrequent that I call up Jody and we have a Zoom and we talk about, well, what is this document even for? And how do I counter this to keep this going? So we do rely on our county counsel. And when we get to certain levels, you have to be represented by an attorney. So I can't be the one that's solely defending the county. I do that up through magistrate appeals. Tax court gets lawyers involved. It gets a little different. So it's been a while, Christian, since we've dedicated a full resource to an appeal. Jody did the Lowe's a year and a half ago at the lower division. I think before that we were outsourcing, but when we staffed up the county council department, and Jody has some experience from her prior employment in, I think, Lynn County in assessment tax. So she didn't have to learn a lot about the business process. Obviously, she knows the legal aspects. So she's been a great resource and always available to assist with the small questions and the bigger ones. My hope is that we get better support from the Department of Revenue and through them, the Department of Justice. When we have statewide issues regarding tax implications, whether it's valuation or the tax collection process, they're the oversight agency that's responsible for ensuring consistency across departments. And this feels like a failure to me from them to not have recognized the statewide impact of big box retail. And they deferred it back to the counties. So you got 36 counties, hopefully with a common approach and a common voice, saying this is how we want to handle these appeals. They're claiming that it's not really their space and that they don't have the funds and that sort of thing. I think as the oversight agency, they missed the train on that one because the statewide impact is significant. But I guess to get back to your question, we do need to use county council somewhat infrequently, but when they're there, they're amazing.
Pretty amazing, huh?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. And so any questions on the appraisal process? Anybody here want to appeal their tax bill? Jeff is in the corner. He'll gladly take your appeal. Okay. We welcome those appeals. It's all part of the process. It truly is. So next I'm gonna jump into cartography and GIS. So I talked about our administration of the ownership of the tax lots and how we're the authoritative group that decides who owns what tax lot. That's where we're tasked with. The other, to put it in maybe simpler terms, it's not just the sale and transfer of deeds and ownership changes, it's land revisions. When the planning department says we're gonna do a partition, a revision, some sort of land adjustment, that all comes through cartography first. They do the line work literally in the digital maps to say this parcel is now a subdivision or this parcel is now whatever. Those we did of all the workload for the year, we had 119 land segregations. So those take digital cartography work. And again, that's a technical field I don't want to dive too deep into, but just know that when those plats make it over to you, they've come through our office first for the digital work to make it part of the base tax lot. So 119 it's an okay year. Big couple of maybe two subdivisions that were relatively large. Really, one is just a continued expansion, I believe, off of Second or Hill in McMinnville here. And then across from Joan Austin Elementary in Newburgh is another larger subdivision going in. Those tend to move the needles in terms of new accounts because you take what was 80 acres of something or some size, and then you put in a couple hundred homes. So 119 land segregations. We did 2,800 ownership changes. Those are sales. So that's when you sell a property from one to the other. We have to review the deed to make sure we know who sold what to who, and that all the legal boundaries that are established in the transfer are correct. So we have a team that does that. And then the data entry happens on ownership changes. Created 300 new accounts. That goes back to subdivisions. So the count totals continue to go up, and I'll just put a plug in that staffing has been level since 2012. And we'll talk more about it in the budget season, but the Department of Revenue did come out with a new staffing model. We'll leave it right there for now. That's a little plant a seed.
Hear this again.
Just going to plant a seed. I know where you're going to get more of me later. So the next thing I want to celebrate in the cartography and GIS world is what we put together in terms of our migration to what's called a cloud-based enterprise server deployment. And that's a fancy way to say we've taken what was little pieces we had in IT, little pieces that we had on local PCs on the floor, all over the place, and consolidated them into an environment that is accessible from our stakeholders, City of Newburgh, City of Mac, Power, Water, and Light. Anybody that needs our GIS data, specifically the assessment and tax office, that's the world I'm talking about, can call us up and say, hey, how do I get this? And the GIS standard for years, and now the most current standard, is now available to them in what is called a map service that allows them to plug into our data. They'll have instant access to it. So as we work the day and we finish the day, it's available. 2 years ago, that was a 60 to 90 day delay where we would process a subdivision and you couldn't go online or you couldn't get that data if you needed it for that period of time because it took that long for the manual processes and the data transfers to happen. So significant kudos to Brian Hansberry and our cartography office for leading that. He has been recognized throughout the state as the example on how to take counties our size and migrate them to that platform. Esri, Arc Esri is the vendor, and they've asked him to do presentations statewide and even nationally on how to get someone of our size to that newest development. They were significant partners in that, so it's not to say we didn't need them along the way, but now we've got a really robust, modern, and ready for expansion deployment. It's ready for others to plug into and sort of reap the same benefits. So we can talk maybe more about a plan, but the infrastructure is built and it's been working for a year and a half, 2 years, 2 years by the end of the year. So we've done some great work there. And our stakeholders are very thankful because that delay is problematic for everyone. Okay. Any questions on cartography GIS before we get into tax? What it all comes down to. Okay, as a quick review, we have 51 taxing districts we serve. The county is one of them. That includes now 5 urban renewals. Double check that, 5, 6, 5, yes. 2 for 2 today.
5 is Newburgh, Lafayette, Dundee, Carlton,
Yep. In McMinnville.
McMinnville.
And we'll talk a little bit more about the impact on the year-over-year levy for a couple of those cities because their urban renewal definitely came into play. But at the high level, for last year, we collected 171 million. I'm using round numbers. I mean, I can give you the full out to the penny if you need it, but 171 million is what we levied last tax season. And this tax year, we just certified on the 9th, we'll be levying 182 million. So a 6% increase or $11 million over last year. That's probably 1% more than I would have expected. And that led me to diving into what exactly transpired. Because I was anticipating maybe 4.75, maybe 5% would be the high end, given what we've seen in new construction, because you have your base that goes up 3%. New construction on top of that is anything between 3 and whatever you actually get. And that's a rough equation, but that's really what you can bank on. The existing portfolio goes up 3, new construction adds a percentage or 2. So why 6? Well, that was interesting. So a couple of things that when we dove into the numbers that came out, and this probably is on the radar for a couple of folks here, if not a handful, and that is that the city of McMinnville, similar to the city of Newburgh, in the last year carved out their fire services and created MAC Fire District. Newburgh did the same thing in 2018. They carved out Newburgh Fire and brought in Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. Both jurisdictions took a similar approach in terms of getting that approved and getting that through to the voters, and that was to reduce their collection on their permanent rate for a period of time to offset the new tax levy that the new district would generate. So the most recent example is McMinnville, and the new tax rate for MAC Fire came as a reduction initially from the city in their permanent rate to keep the increased status quo. That it was hoped that there wouldn't be a huge influx. Well, now that the new districts are getting their full rate and the cities are ratcheting up back towards their permanent rate, that rate increase is something that brings the tax levy also above a 3% standard. You have an increase in value, but you also have an increase in the rate. So for McMinnville, their permanent rate, or the rate they levied, was increased by 0.5%, and they're still not at their permanent rate. So that 0.5% is the beginning of a gradual increase back to the permanent rate. But why that's relevant is we get a lot of folks thinking, well, my tax bill can't go up more than 3%. Well, we got to be careful with definitions. What can't go up, well, what most likely won't go up more than 3% is your assessed value. And there's some exceptions there if you have new construction or if you come out of farm or forest or whatever. But for the majority of folks, your assessed value should go up 3%, not more than 3%. Well, that's fine. The value stays, if the value increases at 3%, but the rate applied to it increases by an extra 0.5%, then your taxes go up relative to that number. So we'll get some phone calls. Why did my tax? I didn't build anything. I didn't add a new deck. I didn't add a room. Why did my taxes go up more than 3%? We are prepared to answer those questions. We've worked with our staff up front and made sure they've got the talking points to say, well, if you're in 40.0 or city 40.51, whatever the city tax code areas are for McMinnville, you have an additional 0.5 point on the rate they levied this year. Newburgh did the same thing to a smaller number, but now it's their second or third increase over what they originally lowered when they took out fire. So they went up 0.09%. Not as drastic, but it did move everybody in the city of Newburgh off of that 3% number to 3.55. So McMinnville standard, your everyday house or business or whatever that didn't have any new construction or exception events, we'll see a 5 to 6% increase. In Newburgh, that'll be a 3.55% increase. There were no new bonds. It wasn't a bond issue. It wasn't a local option issue. It was strictly the cities recapturing what they reduced when they outsourced fire.
Wasn't McMinnville, it's a full point though, because the fire district was $2 and the old rate was $1.50. So I
They
think they're up a
lowered,
whole
they
percent.
initially, the net effect is 1. You're right, but they lowered their permanent down 1.5 instead of 2. So they didn't have to recapture the first half because it was never given. But now they've gone up another 0.5 point. So they still have, well, I can tell you what they have left. to get back to their permanent. If that's a question,
I think it's a whole percent at this point.
a whole percent left to go.
Yeah.
City of McMinnville. Almost. Almost.
Okay.
It's, no, I take that back. Another another four. So they're at 4.86 this year and their permanent rate is 5.02. So that's only another 15 or so.
4.8 includes the bond.
Oh, absent the bond. So they do have a point then. They have
Okay,
exactly
so
1
for-
point left. Sorry, the number, the 4.8 number includes the bond, but if you go back to just the city, it's 4.02. Their permanent rate's 5.02.
Yeah,
So they
Okay.
have a point left.
so for the tax bills that are coming out soon,
Uh-huh.
they still have a full percent to go.
Yeah, if they choose to, next year they could do a full point or they could do another
Right.
half and then a half again.
Right.
There's
Okay.
still a buffer of 1, yeah.
Okay.
And thank you, gallery. We like to do immediate fact checks on the spot, not
We
taking it away.
appreciate those.
So.
I
for the
noticed you
record, I'm
didn't mention
two
the
for-
score.
I know, I'm 2-1 now. So
Yeah,
that's just no accident they're here. So, those will be a couple of the things that we're dealing with, coming into this tax season. There wasn't, like I said, there wasn't a lot of bond movement or options. There was a small option, I think, for West Valley Fire, but we're ready to handle that. I think the bigger issue will be our 2 largest populaces will, we'll be having tax statements that go up more than 3. And the Department of, well, I guess it was a statute, so governed by the Department of Revenue in all their wisdom. They thought it would be beneficial for us to put an internal statement on our tax statement that says if your assessed value goes up more than 3%, contact your assessor's
Yeah,
office.
call them. Or come see him in person.
Send the angry
We
calls.
would love to see them.
Or
Come
get
on down.
Derek's cell phone number. here.
Mine's
Yeah,
first.
sure, sure. Follow us on Twitter, whatever. Yeah, no, so again, we're ready. And that's what should be reassuring here is our staff we've got a great team up front. And we'll be ready for it. The next piece is talking about the 3% increases. So those that will be the cities that will be getting less than 3%. Now, I'm not talking about individual tax bills, but the distribution to districts. And specifically, I've identified a couple of cities that will not be receiving a 3% increase. They'll be receiving less than that. And that has to do with the diversion of tax to their urban renewal districts. So plus they levied less, or they requested less in bonded debt service. So between those two, they're levying, they're going to be getting less through their levy than 3%. And I think that might be challenging for some financial managers in those cities because that 3% base seems pretty reliable. But the impact of urban renewal is what it is. So in Lafayette and Dundee, they both are receiving less than a 3% year-over-year increase. And again, that has to do with the diversion of new revenue going to their urban renewal districts.
So do we know how long those 2 URs have been in place?
Those are Lafayette is new. Lafayette came on with Newburgh. Dundee is one of the originals, so it's been there a while. So no, I don't have the exact dates, but one is new and one has been a while. A while meaning, I don't know, at least 6 years, 10 years. Dundee's urban renewal. Yeah,
And don't they have like a 50-year urban renewal district or
Yeah.
something crazy?
it'll be going for some time.
Can you,
Lafayette's is really along their corridor.
Right.
That Main Street corridor and some, maybe a block or 2 back. So I don't know, the incremental value has to come within that footprint. You guys are aware of that. So how much development's going to happen right there? I don't know the city planning desire for Lafayette, but their residential build out above it, that's still part of the city and will be going to the city. So,
Okay.
yeah.
is that something you can quantify? Now that we're having all of these discussions about new urban renewal districts in Dayton or additional ones in McMinnville, is that something you can actually quantify and say, hey,
Yeah.
look, these two cities are receiving less than 3% now because of the impact of this district?
For sure,
Okay.
for sure. And we have the diversion of tax dollar that goes to the district. So that's that's when you, each district that is affected, we have a report that says this is how much it affected you.
Mhm.
So I have the city of Dundee's net loss for the diversion to urban renewal, that number.
Okay.
I could share that, or we were just looking at that, I don't know, 2 days ago. But yeah, it's happening. So
That's, it's crazy to me because I think most people think that that 3% is locked in, that it's a given.
yeah. Well, if you're lacking in new construction's down. And had you not had an urban renewal, you get back to 3%.
Mhm.
Well, then you're starting at 3
Right.
and coming off of that, which is what's happening there.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes for them, new construction wise next year. But today that was an anomaly. So I looked at the year over year, who went up and who went down. McMinnville stuck out at 13%. Newburgh stuck out at 9%.
Mhm.
And we figured that out. But then there was some negative or less than 3. And I was like, oh, why is that happening? And when you get down in the numbers, it's the diversion to urban renewal. So,
Mhm.
okay. County is slated to get 31 and some change. I think we'll have the actual 4A that is the SAL document that talks about collection for the county. Those documents for all districts will be out on the websites by Friday. And you can look at each one individually, each district, year over year, however you want to do it. We make all that available. So that'll all be happening, like I said, by Friday on those reports. Any other questions on taxes or that department?
Can you just basically, just for the record, talk about, or give us a number for what actually out of someone's property tax bill winds up going to the county? Because typically when the tax bills go out, they think we're getting all of that money.
Yeah.
And we're not. And also, we are also doing the administrative back end work for the districts. Everybody else who gets money is just getting a check from us. Well, your office is doing the work and it's on the county's dime. That's a big piece.
Yeah, for sure. No, we are and we've talked about during budget season too, we're dependent solely on the general fund. When you look at the contribution of other revenue sources and they've depleted themselves, there was CAFA, but it's below 10% now. So we're 90% dependent on general funds to provide the services that you're referring to. And it's the financial solvency for those districts. Like it's the number one item on their balance sheet.
Mhm.
So there should be a concern about protecting it, ensuring that it's well-funded to the point that it's a return on investment to them. It's not happening. So I've been a part of a work group at the state level and that House Revenue Committee to figure out a way to bring partners to the table to help with funding. And honestly, the diversion of any distribution, any holdback of the property tax has been a hard no on any level at any percent. So the last meetings we've had, there was talk that the state will backfill the school with probably a $9 billion, maybe a $9+ billion backfill for the school system statewide. Our association of county assessors was looking for a rounding error of a fraction in assistance to help administer the tax base for the property taxes in Oregon, and it was still a hard no. I mean, I think it's more of a mental hurdle to say, do you want to put in to support what we're providing? And their answer has been no. And unfortunately, I think the collective response, maybe not for everyone, but what it's been so far is the county has a permanent rate and the county's job is to do this function. And we need to stay within that. What they're not understanding is it'll come at the expense of what could be their additional revenue, because we can only do so much for so long. So funding is a hot topic. It'll have its place in the legislative session coming up.
Yeah.
We are poised to be active with AOC and maybe in lock and step have some solutions to present. Hopefully we get legislation on. It's needed. So I've been asked to present at the AOC conference in November. on a panel to discuss this and maybe get the word out to start the effort from the other side to say, hey, you know, stakeholders need to say to their leadership, you know, whether it's the K-12 or it's, you know, small districts in general, that they, if you appreciate the value, then maybe there's a space to say we can fund a portion of it because we are general fund and the general fund is doing its thing. The property tax revenue and the expenditures for general government are divergent. They're going different ways. So there's more pressure on cutting something to get there. I get that. So
Do you see any movement when it comes to increasing CAFA? Because that's laughable.
Yeah.
How it hasn't been increased in so long.
forever, yeah. It's at its inception, it funded 32 to 36% of the assessor's budget. That was never indexed. It was never readdressed for, you know, well, now things are different, if you will.
Right.
The model's still the same. Everything we're working on through legislation will still channel through CAFA. So if we get to whatever mechanism we get to, those funds will be collected throughout the state under that new format, rolled into CAFA, and then CAFA distributed to the counties. We need the leverage of Metro and what they will collect either through a transactional something or whatever it's going to be to be a subsidy for smaller counties. So CAFA will stay the distribution model, but how we get more money into CAFA will be the question. And why I have some thoughts, I don't know. This is maybe, you know, we can talk, maybe I give you some ideas offline on what we're trying to get behind, a couple of thoughts in terms of an association. But the problem is real. The problem is now. Every county is experiencing it. Even Metro's experiencing it now with labor costs and inflation and everything else. You know, 10, 15, 20% increases in expenditures don't equate to a 3% increase in property tax revenue. So something's got to give there. Modernization is a big topic. Trying to do more with technology and less with physical labor. What's become unfortunate about that is now vendors and technical solutions are becoming just as expensive.
Mhm.
You know, we're looking right now, one of the things on my major project list is that we are one of 3 counties in a joint county request for proposal for a new tax platform. Our tax and appraisal platform was built in the mid-90s, installed in Lane County in 97. And we got a piece of that installation the last time we tried to do a conversion that failed with a certain group. I can't even start to think about the numbers it's going to take to purchase software now relative to what it used to be. So modernization is expensive, labor is expensive. You know, it just is what it is. Those benefiting most from the program, all the districts we serve, I would hope they'd step up and provide some assistance. Fraction of a percent of assistance if we're being on the record. So more to come on that. But I am actively involved in finding a solution. I do not want to come back with a needs request to the board.
We don't want you to either.
I said I didn't want to. There's no promises on that. Okay. Thank you for the question. So it's, if I can just quickly here, I want to touch on a couple of major projects. So each year we have to submit the CAFA grant, which we talked about. We got that submitted and approved. Thank you for your approvals. One of our data analysts and our chief appraisers, with guidance from our deputy assessor, do what's called the ratio report every year. It's a formal, I don't know how many pages it is. It's probably 80 pages, maybe more, report that goes out every year. The state has to review it and accept it under their guidance, which they've done. So we're thankful for that. Annual piece is done. Our annual appraisal plan is also due November 1st. That's telling the folks who issue CAFA what our plan is. This is how many bodies we have. This is how many things we need to do. And this is how we're going to do it. They have to also accept that plan as meeting the requirements for sort of sufficient appraisal plan for our county. So we'll see what they say. I'm sure it'll be fine because we've got a great thing going. We upgraded our current software twice in 2024. Thanks to IT, Todd Pettijohn and Byron Shrew in the IT department are like a lifeline. We call them up with, I'm not even going to try to regurgitate the technical references, but software upgrades and servers and things and patches or whatnot, but they do a fantastic job and they have us up to date. That wasn't the case for a long time. And vendors become exhausted with trying to provide support when you're 10 generations back. They don't even have people on staff that still remember how to do that. So they want you to be current. We've pushed all our platforms to being as current as possible without being on the knife's edge. So got that done. I just mentioned we're in an RFP and a procurement process. So that the RFP has gone out. There's always been, well, it was always known there's 3 vendors in Oregon that can provide assessment and tax software. They're the only ones that responded to the RFP. Clackamas, Lane, myself, and Wasco, so it's actually 4, are looking at who we might go to collectively as a group to lower the cost. And it's in its infancy right now. We're looking at demos, we're doing some things, but this is going to be a significant capital request down the road if we choose to go this route. So I'm trying to keep an eye on the calendar they're proposing, because we'll need some time to build up a reserve if there's going to be, like I said, a capital outlay to do a software conversion. But it's underway. Jody, again, thank you for her procurement expertise in that. There was it was an unusual multi-county request where we all had to meet, our own internal requirements for RFPs, but also general practices for that. And she was fundamental in making sure we had our T's crossed and I's dotted. More to come on that down the road. Again, it's just sort of getting started. Brian Hansberry, again, our cartographer and GIS analyst, he's now looking at sort of the path to the next iteration of our web-based Esri enterprise solution. That is actually now due for a technical upgrade, if you will. And ORMAP is very encouraged by what we've done and is willing to put in some grant dollars to help us fund it with a partnership with Esri to ensure that we get what would be the example platform put together and out there, and everyone's blessed it is technically sound and the right deployment. So he'll be working on that. We'll have a grant request sometime before the end of the year, I'm assuming, to start that upgrade in that environment. That is what I have for major projects. I am thankful for the team I have, that we have, the group we have working together. We've been together for a long time. You're all aware there's very little turnover, or, we just have a great team. And it takes time to build the expertise that we have. And it's a complicated platform and a complicated process. So I want to say to them publicly, thank you for their commitment and the work they've done to support us and our property tax program. And we really are one of the bright spots in the state. So we should all be proud of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
So speaking of major projects, we've got SIP. We're kind of tracking the construction timeline with them. I think they're going to be done towards the beginning of the year. So they'll come online for next November, right? The SIP program.
Yeah, the Hampton SIP program. Yeah, that was their original plan. We'll be out. We need to coordinate with the Department of Revenue, but we'll be out to that site to verify what's been completed for a 1/1 valuation sometime before the end of the year, maybe right after, but you need to be around the 1st to see what it was. But that is the thought, as they come on this line for the 25 million base in additional tax, and then we will calculate November the 1st community service fee. They'll have its own little side process on billing that and collecting that.
Okay.
But
So
yeah,
November
that
of
is
25.
anticipated. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the plan at this point. If we get out there and it's not ready or something, we'll have to talk about, how far along are you? Because they had 2 years of construction in progress.
Right.
So they had the exemption for the build out. That can't be extended any farther. So then there's a value of something. What is it? Hopefully they're online and everything goes as planned.
Yeah.
I don't anticipate any issues at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Yep.
Any questions for Derek?
Enjoy your chili.
Yeah.
I just want to say,
Stop by and say hello.
I sound like a broken record today, but again, we've been talking about the fact that your department is solely, you rely on the general fund, and there were some additional needs and pressures on your budget this past cycle. And your department was part of that decision that we made to internally shift money over and make sure that you were covered. So obviously, now we understand why all of the work that you put into this. So we just really appreciate your team.
Thank you.
Yep,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
You have a
Thank you.
great, you have
You
a
got it.
great esprit de corps over there. Always a
Yes.
party, always something going
Always,
on.
always fun.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to find the levity when you're the tax group. Believe me, I get a tax bill too. So let's, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Let's see. Okay, so we are moving on to our work session. There's nothing today. And that brings us to consent agenda. We have some employee safety advisory committee members to renew. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Any discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, motion passes. Thank you. Item H, old business. There's nothing today. Item I, other business. I1 is consideration of approval of a notice of intent to award a contract for jail medical services to MedHealth LLC. And we are joined today by our jail captain, Mike Brown. Welcome, Mike.
Welcome, Captain.
Captain.
morning.
Okay, do you want to kind of bring us up to speed? This is a notice of intent to award, but you've been having some lengthy discussions behind the scenes.
Before we get too
Oh.
far, because it looks like the sheriff is also joining on, do we need to grant him permission? Is he planning on presenting or?
I believe he's planning on being involved in the conversation, yes.
Okay.
Okay, I just want to,
Welcome, Sheriff.
we have to do a little step to make sure he's allowed to talk. Yeah, there we go.
Thanks for catching that.
Good morning.
Sheriff, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, we can't hear you, so hang on 1 second.
Are you there, Sheriff?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, we can hear you.
Perfect. Now we can hear you. Okay, so either Sheriff or Captain, if you want to kick us off with the discussion.
I guess I can go first. Part of the process in evaluating the RFP, we had a committee put together from the Community Corrections, Jessica Beach and I. We each had a member of our department in this process evaluate the RFPs once we got them back. We had 2 respondents. The first one was MedHealth, who we currently have a contract with. And then the second one was Ivy Medical PLCC. In that process, I worked with Jody to come up with a form that I utilized with the committee. I believe you guys have a copy of that in front of you. And this is the culmination of all the individual forms. So as you can see on the max points next to the categories, the points awarded and a comparison that I've done a side by side. And then in the justification, those are comments that were made during the evaluation process to come up with a total at the end for what the point value was. And then I included in the justification next to that the costs associated with those proposals. And down below that, under the additional comments, I added some narrative that would help distinguish between the 2 respondents and the proposals that we received. And I'm prepared to discuss those and the process that we took to come up with the recommendation for the notice of intent to award the MedHealth respondent the contract. Obviously, there's going to be some much needed conversation if and when we do.
Okay. Are you, I don't know, Commissioner Johnston, were you here when we, for WellPath? I think that was before your time.
No.
We made the switch from
years ago.
WellPath a little over a year ago after they gave us notice that they were pulling out. of the state. We entered into a short-term agreement
Yeah.
with MedHealth to allow us to go through the solicitation and procurement process, which we're coming to the end of now. So we still have our current agreement with MedTrust. It's MedTrust and MedHealth are the same entity. MedTrust is their legal name. They do business as MedHealth. We've extended the current agreement through the end of October. So that's where we are
Right.
at the moment.
I think on a macro level, this is a really difficult service. There's very few people that actually do this. And Sheriff, correct me if I'm wrong or jump in here, but WellPath we had the contract with them previously. They had indicated not only I think they were leaving, but also that the cost of this contract would significantly increase in the future. So that was kind of also looming at the time. I believe MedHealth came in at a similar rate that we were paying, but we also understood at the time that the cost would go up, kind of once they were able to assess the work. So I'm not surprised that the cost of it is significantly higher. I guess, my concern would be, how does this impact internal budget? And maybe the sheriff can speak to that, but
You're correct that when WellPath was the provider previously, before they gave us notice that they were going to be withdrawing from the state, their preliminary discussions were that we were going to see a significant increase in the contract pricing in Oregon. What we ended up seeing with them withdrawing was that MedHealth came in and basically met us at the existing rate that WellPath was providing service at, understanding that that would be looked at in the future. The timing of this is really unfortunate in some respects because there's so much discussion right now about the 1115 waiver that is set to start in January. Obviously, we have a need to be able to provide medical services for the folks that are incarcerated in the county jail. But we don't know what this is going to look like a year from now if we're able to once again utilize the insurance that individuals have while they're in custody versus those benefits turning off the minute that they come in. So I think even in Derek's presentation, he talked about the divergence of the costs of personnel and doing work in Oregon, and that the revenues do not keep pace. And the healthcare industry is no different than what we face in law enforcement, that it's highly competitive. It's challenging for them to find staff that are willing to work in carceral healthcare and to be competitive in a marketplace where they can go pretty much anywhere and get a job. So I think that all of those things have culminated in what you're seeing reflected in the price. And that's really the difference between the two proposals. Is one is essentially maintaining what we already have with 24-hour coverage, and one would be a reduction in coverage. And Captain Brown can speak to those details.
yeah, so I think that's my, 24/7 coverage is great. And obviously that has an impact on your staff. A positive impact, I would say, on your staff and alleviating some of their burdens. I think it probably, whether it's direct or not, it probably has a positive impact on our insurance coverage. Has a positive impact on the emergency department because you're not utilizing them as much. But, what does that look like in reality if we were to go with something that is a little bit more scaled back, where you don't have, nighttime coverage or whatever?
Well, in the comparison and based on the staffing models that they presented, we would basically revert back to the medical staffing levels during that Jed Hockmeyer They're recommending an EMT here. There's also an on-call nurse that we can call out on a needed basis. But there's also a cost associated with that if we do call them to come out, not to mention all of the intakes that we take throughout the evening to have the medical clearance by our medical staff to allow us to lodge them based on that medical assessment. I know that there is a vast difference between the two proposals. I don't know how feasible it would be to revert back to a on-call or part-time medical staffing model. It does definitely affect the insurance. They're highly recommending this, having the 24/7 medical. And so I know that there's a vast difference in the price for each of them, but to go back and reduce services, at least on the staffing level, I think we're incurring some potential risks and liability.
So am I understanding that correctly? If you have an intake at after hours, you'd have to call an EMT to come and do the intake assessment?
Yes, ma'am. We would have to call a medical professional come in to do the assessment. We have to make sure that their blood pressure isn't too high, their blood sugar isn't too high. If they're intoxicated, there's a whole vast list of things, criteria that the medical staff actually conduct during the assessment to evaluate whether or not they are acceptable, but based on those standards for us to lodge them.
Do we have any follow-up procedures when we intake an AIC and they check the box that says they don't have insurance? Is there any follow-up to that to verify that they truly don't have insurance?
I'm not aware of one internally on the sheriff's side, but I believe there is on the medical side, and I'm not sure what that procedure is. But I can find that information out.
So we're being told on the congressional level that the 1115 waivers are only going to affect AICs who are released within 90 days.
Yes, ma'am.
So is that the vast majority of our population?
Our current average length of stay is about 12 days.
Okay.
On average.
Okay. So that's good, I suppose.
You will see those individuals that are faced or charged with very significant crimes that are spending significant amount of time pre-trial in the jail. And some of those, in the extreme cases, you're talking, 2 years or more. So there are going to be those individuals that are outside of that 90-day window, but it is a very, very small minority of the intakes that come into the facility. As the captain referenced, the average length of stay is 12 days. And oftentimes, once somebody has been in custody for, 30 days or 60 days, you really have been able to evaluate the stability of their health. Not that there aren't anomalies that the diagnoses of some folks in the jail, but for the most part, the 1115 waiver is going to cover the vast majority of folks that come in the door.
So Sheriff, a question. I know we were talking at one point recently about having somebody who is going to be housed for a significant period of time who has really serious ongoing expensive medical care required. And that is enough to break anybody's budget, especially one that's already struggling.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the fail safes or options that other counties are using? Because this doesn't seem sustainable. It doesn't seem possible for us to be able to maintain this.
I just recently was made aware of an instance many years ago where we utilized the Oregon Department of Corrections has a facility, I believe it's over near the state prison in Ontario, that is essentially an oncology ward where they have folks that are incarcerated that are there receiving cancer treatment. In other instances, we've been a little bit creative in exploring ways to continue to provide those services that folks need for their health. But you're absolutely right that there's always that looming question of a very significant illness or disease that requires significant treatment. And I don't know that anybody has the best answer for that. When you run into these folks that have been incarcerated for more than the 90 days that are not going to qualify for the waiver, I have not heard much discussion about how to address those cases. And then you really have to start looking at some creative solutions like remote monitoring, because folks are just in the hospital. Once they are technically not in our custody, then that's no longer our responsibility.
So if they were released to a local hospital or any place else, what would OHP pick that up?
It would just depend on the individual and what they qualify for, if they're OHP or private insurance or Medicare, Medicaid.
What if they weren't enrolled? In other words, if they had no existing coverage, would we then find a way to enroll them in OHP, or would that be OHP's problem?
I think Captain Brown can probably speak to that a little bit, but that is one of the discussions about who's going to be responsible once this waiver is in place, because we will see folks come in who are not actively enrolled. And so who is going to take point on getting individuals enrolled, because whether they're there for 3 hours or 3 days or 3 weeks, the ability to get somebody enrolled while they're in the facility is going to be advantageous for them as an individual, and also for us when it comes to providing necessary care.
Maybe get the CCO involved in the discussion.
Yeah.
I've had a few conversations with Director Manfrin about how we encapsulate this, as well as some of the other initiatives that we have going on with Unitas and some pre-discharge planning and the behavioral health deflection, looking at individuals and doing more on the front end to do some preparation for them being released from custody, essentially walking them over to the office to meet with that staff before we lose track of them or they go back out of the downtown area. That we're coming up with some methodologies to improve that experience, that Unitas program being one of them. But I have spoken with the CCO, and it is something that they obviously have a strong mission for. And so I think we're going to be looking at all of those solutions moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay. So the option that the sheriff and your team would prefer is the 24/7 coverage option.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Have we talked to CIS if we didn't go 24-hour coverage? Is it a wash for the extra cost here versus what it's going to cost us for?
And I could probably speak to that one, because it's not necessarily a driver that on our renewals. I mean, if we don't have the coverage, then yeah, then we have issues with our deductible and our renewal costs or things like that. Where more of the challenge, and I'm looking across at Christian too, the more the concern is if the risk and exposure of not having the 24/7 coverage and having something that we're obligated to provide, and we don't have that coverage for that period of window, something runs afoul, then that increases the county's exposure for a future claim, down the road.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes you wouldn't even know it till that claim actually happened. And
Correct.
the CIS is like, oh, here's your settlement.
Correct.
Yeah, there's not a statutorily described sort of basic minimum level of services.
Right.
But we've talked about this with the jail numbers of times and with CIS and administration. I mean, if we were to provide less than 24/7 coverage, then the question becomes, if some sort of significant medical event happens during a time when we don't have outside third-party medical provider coverage on site, then our staff will necessarily become more involved, which then draws the county potentially into the more direct line of fire if and when something comes out of that medical incident that leads to a claim. So I think it's more of a best practice than a specific level of required service, right? Best practice obviously would be 24/7 coverage, not just for the county's risk exposure, but also for the health and well-being of the AICs in the facility to make sure that someone is there on site in case something happens. And from my understanding, our outside providers and our staff, in conjunction with first responders, have done a good job. They've done a very good job in trying to make sure that we're meeting those minimum level expectations, if not more. Obviously, the more service you can provide, the better, but all of that comes with a cost. So then there is that cost benefit trade-off, right? We want to provide as much as we can within fiscal limitations.
Would we be able to do a sort of a subcontract with an EMT or, somebody that would be less expensive than the contract employee, but would be able to do the basics needed overnight if we did that on call? So in other words, if we worked out something with Mac Fire and we had somebody on staff over there who would be able to do that for a whole lot less.
Part of the proposal from Ivy, excuse me, was to have an EMT who was on call. But again, it's not an immediate response, and there's a cost associated with that service if we do call them. And that's in that RFP or the response.
And my understanding is that EMT would be an employee of Ivy.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
again goes back to the same staffing levels and concerns that we had during the jet.
Yeah, in that scenario, we didn't have outside medical
Correct.
coverage. It was still in-house, but one of the challenges we had and have had in prior situations is, the level of care that's been available in a worst case scenario, sort of emergency type situation.
So my question is more along the lines of, would it be more cost effective to have a subcontract with a local EMT rather than a staff person, for instance, at Ivy or anybody else?
I would have to probably even broach the topic with like the fire chief, because that's not a traditional role for an EMT, like with the fire district, especially when you start talking about folks that are in the county jail. And it really would take more than one person, because on any given night, we have bookings coming in all night long. And so one individual is not going to be able to cover the demand to have that evaluation done on the new intakes. And by and large, the new intakes are where the risk resides, because they're an unknown. We don't know much about their medical history unless it's somebody that we've seen before. And given their level of intoxication or impairment or the circumstances, they may not be willing to share any information about their personal medical history. And so, that first 24-hour period that somebody is in the jail is, there's a reason why we have the current practice of doing a screening and assessment before we even take custody of them. If you talk to a lot of the local departments, they've had many experiences where they show up with an individual and our medical provider does an evaluation and indicates this person is not medically stable. We are not going to accept custody. You need to take them to the emergency room and get them further evaluated. Some of those end up returning after the physician has done a more detailed evaluation and has discharge instructions that says that they're okay. Some of them don't return. They wind up staying at the hospital, or they end up with a citation in lieu of custody because they're not medically stable. And so the nighttime really, and none of the proposals really address the fact that as a 24/7, 365, you start talking about holidays and nighttime and weekends. Obviously, the fire district does work all those hours, but I don't know what their staffing and availability is. And when you start looking at contracting those as a one-off rather than complete services package, I don't know that there would be cost savings if they're even willing to entertain the idea of taking on that liability themselves, whether their insurance covers them to be doing work inside of the carceral setting, or a lot of those details.
Okay, never mind.
I'd still pursue it. Well, how, like, my question is for this contract, is it a year-to-year contract?
I believe this one's a 3-year.
3-year
The
contract?
initial one was a year when WellPath left, and that's why we're doing the RFP now.
So we're looking at a 5% increase for 3 years, but with a 6-year projected out.
On the Ivy respond, yes.
Would,
You know,
um,
and
Med Health, was there an escalator?
I don't know if they've had that conversation yet about whether or not there might be annual year-over-year increases for
okay.
Med Health. That is something we did see historically with WellPath.
Right.
Did they say 3%, or they were going to tie it to, some metrics at the time? I don't know that that was actually
Is that
called
going to
out.
be subject to the negotiated contract?
Yeah, I mean,
which is
if
next
the
step in
board approves
process?
the notice of intent to award, I think that level of detail would be part of the discussion with Med Health about ways to sort of, better manage the costs over time. If there's ways to, readjust the scope, the level of services, the timing of the services, to see if we can't bring that number down slightly, and then obviously have a sense of what ideally the cost would be expected to increase over time. I mean, like everything else, healthcare costs are not going down, so I think it's realistic to assume that there would be some level of increase year over year, or perhaps Med Health would be willing to lock in a number for 1 year or 2 year, or 2 years or 3 years, and then entertain an increase after that.
I mean, I would prefer the 24/7 coverage. I guess, obviously those numbers are important as we get into the next step. But I just can't wrap my mind around how it's more efficient to do an on-call EMT or nurse to come in and do multiple intakes every night and on the weekends and on holidays. You're going to have multiple people on that Rolodex, which is costly because you're paying them to be on call, whether they're working or not, frankly. So I just don't see how that's feasible. That doesn't make any sense to me. Because, frankly, if there's an emergency too, if you have somebody incarcerated already and there's an emergency, you're already calling, 911 and running that up. So,
I think the EMT on call is just going to add another layer of complexity to that process as well.
right.
Well, that gets to how are we going to pay for this? I mean, it's not like we've had to take money from one department specifically to try to make other departments somewhat whole. Fortunately, it didn't impact that department. Nobody lost jobs, no services were impacted at all. So I appreciate the diligence of the board looking into how we could do that, but I don't know where else we have pots of money. We have depleted every couch cushion, and we continue to go to our administrator, chief budget officer, and say, hey, is there any money left in the cookie jar? And we're looking at requests coming out of the assessor's office, and we're looking at requests for dog control, and then we have this. So I think we can talk about the merits of this, but we also have to remember we don't have another option of where we get money from unless there's just some windfall, which we don't see.
Well, I think, and maybe the sheriff can touch on this, but we had 1.3 in the last budget for the contract. I want to say we had some escalator or something in this year's budget.
Yeah, I don't have the number right in front of me. I believe we had budgeted somewhere around 1.6 for the current fiscal year for the medical services. We had built in an anticipated increase, but obviously with this being an RFP and a lot of what the market is doing, the increase was more than what we planned for or budgeted for. And I'm sure that Mr. Huffer can fill in, but in our preliminary discussions, this letter of intent really is just expressing that this is our intention, but obviously we do not have a final contract. We would enter into continued discussions with the vendor to see if we can narrow in on a firm number and have projections for subsequent years. As you all well know, I have been struggling with some significant staffing issues, and I do expect that there will be some personnel savings, which will help offset, at least in this current year, with the unknown of what the waiver program is going to do for us moving forward, and also the unknown of the continuation of jail bed rentals. There's a lot up in the air. I was waiting for this first quarter to close so we can take a harder look at our numbers. I don't know that it would necessarily be a huge issue in this year as much as it would be in subsequent years. But then we don't know what the waiver program is going to end up doing for us or how it will change the way that we provide that service, if it does, or whether they're just getting reimbursed from insurance privately and we're not paying for that out of our budget. So I think for the interim, it just is our intention to negotiate with them further and see if they can meet us at a point where we have a strategy for how we're going to pay for it and also a good understanding of what we're going to get for what we're paying for.
What about the pharmacy cap? Because that's another piece.
The pharmacy cap is something that we would end up discussing with them further. The pharmacy cap and the outside medical. So that's when they're not able to provide the necessary service and we still have to take them out to a provider in the community. Both of those are things that we have to look at, just with the lessons learned of this past 7 or 8 months.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess my point was we're not starting from zero. We have what, 1.56 already set aside for this year.
Correct. The other part that I was going to add, because, usually I don't start, I try to have a little bit of a breather in closing out the previous budget year and get a month or two into the new fiscal year before I start working for the following fiscal year. But also knowing, because when the sheriff gave me a heads up of what the RFPs were looking at, I'm already starting to do some of that analysis, and just so the board, you're going to see when I come forward like I do in December and we have that work session to start talking about the discretionary allocation. I've already basically started building some preliminary numbers that, so hopefully we're not waiting until May to have that last minute discussion of where we're having to potentially pull from other departments, but having that early on, they're going to need the jail's going to need a pretty significant increase in discretionary, and so I've already got some of that identified and I'm going to be prepared to talk about that in more detail come December. But that's some of the work that I'm doing right now. The other parts that'll be really interesting, because like the sheriff was saying, is watching the waiver and the insurance that, that hopefully, it'll be interesting to see how the mechanics work with that. If
Right.
we're getting reimbursed or if they're getting reimbursed, and then that reduces the impact that we're actually paying for.
Yeah.
But at the same time, based on, history and things, I will say the 24/7 coverage, it's pretty critical, because we either pay for it now or we'll pay for it later. And so I think, I'll continue to work with the sheriff and Captain Brown on the budgetary, and we're going to have, I feel good about this year. But again, we're just finishing up the first quarter of the fiscal year. So it's really hard to project out everything through the end of the fiscal year, but we'll continue to look at the current year and then do some preparation for next year. So hopefully, that at the same time, it might also require, like anything else, that if we have something that's coming in and it's a critical service that we have to provide, then we have to start looking at some of the other where we can realize some cost savings
Yep.
as well.
So what's the liability share? In other words, we had a provider who picked up some of the liability of a claim.
So it really will depend on the specific facts of the claim, right? So if you have claims arising from failure to provide adequate medical care, right? And we have a third-party medical provider in the jail, well, you would expect the majority of that liability would fall on the provider, right? If the claim is you misdiagnosed me, or you failed to identify this, or ignored my requests for assistance, that would be more of a claim you would expect the third-party provider to be responsible for. If the claim is related to, well, I became ill because of some condition in the jail that then caused me to die, or whatever, then that might be one where the county would be more directly responsible for damages arising from that claim. So it is pretty fact specific. What I can say is, of the claims that we've seen, and this is not unique to our county, jail medical claims for either death or injury are up all over the state and likely all over the country. It's a difficult area. It's a high risk environment, and you're dealing with vulnerable populations. So it's difficult. The jail has done a wonderful job in improving the range of services, the scope of services, the safety steps that are taken to ensure that folks don't enter the facility who are not safe. If they need to be sent back to the hospital, they are, and the sheriff or Captain Brown can speak to this, but I do think that MedHealth has been a good partner, and they've tried hard, and making a transition like this is never easy. But I think they've done a good job, and continue to try and work as closely with the county as we can to minimize those risks. But it's hard to say with some sort of statistical certainty that X% would be the county's exposure and X% is the provider. In all of these cases, even if the ultimate liability landed with the provider, the county can expect to be named in the litigation. The county can expect CIS and administration in our office to be involved in processing those claims. But yeah, that's one of the decision points in deciding whether or not to have in-house jail medical services, which we did historically, or to contract it out. I think there's still a number of jails that provide some level of in-house services. I think many have done what we've done and looked for outside jail medical providers. But given the cost and the challenges with this population, it is a difficult space to operate in, which is why I think we're seeing a smaller number of providers, and the costs for those providers tends to go up because they're doing the same analysis we are, balancing the risk and the cost, and what does their insurance look like, and how can they ensure they're providing a sufficient level of services. So it is a complicated area in which to operate, and we've known that for a long time. CIS knows that, and CIS, I think, is trying to help where they can and do what they can. But it is an area where the number of claims that we've seen have made this a more expensive area to operate in, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think at this point I'm in favor of proceeding with the notice of intent, but with the caveat of, I think in those negotiations, we need to go in with, we got to sharpen our pencil a little bit here. the 3-year timeline makes me a little nervous. However, if we can leverage that for a lower annual cost, maybe, it would be better to have a locked-in rate. So I don't know, just some thoughts there.
It makes you nervous that it's too long or not long enough?
Too long, but I think my concern would be offset by a locked-in rate that's predictable.
And keep in mind too, I haven't seen the draft agreement for the new provider agreement, but oftentimes it'll be a 3-year term, but there would be an ability to terminate on 30, 60, 90, 180 days notice if for whatever reason we ran into another fiscal crisis or, you know what I mean? So if while it's a 3-year term, there is often an escape valve
Yeah.
that if, and it's not one that I would necessarily recommend we take because again, finding someone to come in
Yeah.
and pick up these services is hard, which is why I would expect it would be 90 to 180 days notice for either side to get out of the contract, which is probably the minimum amount of time it'll take to find some sort of a replacement model. So yeah, 3-year term, but there are oftentimes ways to get out of a contract if absolutely necessary in less time for both sides. And we'll see what that negotiation
And
looks
just
like.
based on recent experience, when we were given the notification with the last time with the change, when we received the termination that was a mad scramble.
Yeah.
On our part, so it kind of cuts both ways.
That was fifth, like 60 days.
Correct.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions before we
None.
proceed?
No.
Okay, I will move approval of item I1. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you, Captain.
Captain.
Thank you,
Sheriff.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's one more at the bottom of the agenda.
Yeah, before you go too far,
Okay.
there's item I5 if you wanted to,
Okay.
if there was questions about that one while they're still here.
Oh, okay. Okay, we will move item I5 up. And this is consideration of approval to authorize the submission of the 2023-2025 grant solicitation for the jail-based medications for opioid use disorder grant program. And Sheriff, this is our medically assisted detox. I'm trying to think of the right terms.
Correct. This is the solicitation that the Criminal Justice Commission put out specifically for jail-based medication-assisted treatment. So this is the ability to provide the medication-assisted step-down treatment to folks that are in the jail suffering from opiate use disorder to kind of get them started on that path. So I'm sure, again, Captain Brown can fill in details, but currently we are able to maintain when individuals come in and they already are on a plan and have a prescription, but we are not able to do the inductions of new patients essentially. So somebody comes in, they're not currently on a plan and have a prescription, potentially been using opioids out of custody. And as soon as they're brought in, that clock starts ticking for them with respect to medical and withdrawal type symptoms. So the grant really is part of what came out of House Bill 4002 and the behavioral health deflection. The Criminal Justice Commission established some preset amounts for each county. And so I'll let Captain Brown just kind of fill you in on our preliminary discussions about how it would work, but this is just us applying for it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, initially the grant came out and we applied, just the closing date was actually Sunday. The amount that we're looking at receiving from this grant is about $242,000 and some change. And again, this is designed for us to identify and contract with a third party to come in and administer the MAP program for us within our facility. Currently, we don't have the commitment from HHS or with the contract with MedTrust to provide that service. So in discussions with the sheriff, it would be utilized to find and identify a third party to administer the MAP program for us.
And we were doing this before, even for new patients, right?
That was before my time, but I do understand that there
Yeah.
was a program. I don't know the extent that it was.
There was a previous program that was grant funded, but it had limitations. I believe it was like 8 individuals at a time that could be on the protocol. And this is basically a full access. There's no limitation on the number of folks that can be enrolled.
Okay. Okay, commissioners, any questions?
And
Do I have a motion to approve?
so moved.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for catching that.
Thank you.
That wasn't on my original one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't take it anymore.
Cold.
I'm freezing.
Keep you awake.
Sure. Isn't anything else? Okay, so back up to I2. Consideration of approval of an agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and Lysandra. Am I saying that right? Chandra Jenkins to provide professional psychiatric behavioral health services at the rate of $88.20 per hour, effective October 24th of 2024. Any further questions?
Just how do we get 20 cents? That's it.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you.
That's some good negotiations right there when you get
Broken down.
Yeah.
Divvies up.
by percentages and cents.
Okay, I3 is consideration of approval of intergovernmental grant agreement 183645 between Yamhill County and the Oregon Health Authority for infrastructure and modernization funding not to exceed $100,000 retroactively effective April 1, 2024 through June 30th of 2025. And this is regarding our electronic medical record system. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Any discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. I4 is consideration of approval of amendment number 11 to agreement number 180033 between Yamhill County and the Oregon Health Authority for Public Health Services Board Order 23-260, adding funding in the amount of $103,189. And this additional amendment is to expand. I want to see what the original language was there. I4. Commissioner Starrett, I don't know if you can jump in here, but
Yes,
there
I
was
can.
some original language.
So basically, historically, we've had school-based mental health expansion funds, and those funds went to 2 of our 3 existing school-based health centers. And this would actually go to support the 3rd center. So we have used those expansion funds for others. It also outlines the fact that there is no designation. In other words, you could take 75% of the funds and give it to one school-based health center and then 25 to one site, and one other site could get none. So in this case, the money would go for the third site. So
Okay.
really, it's so that that funding is coming directly from OHA.
So I asked a few questions on, because these are specifically for school-based health center mental health dollars, which is mental health treatment for
Mhm.
kids in high schools. We currently serve Willamina and McMinnville. And this would be to potentially push those specific services to Newburgh.
Excuse me,
Our,
Chair, I think those services exist at Newburgh currently.
I'm reading Director Manfred's email. I'll just read it so there's no interpretation by me. It says, as far as the school-based healthcare mental health dollars in the IGA, currently the Willamina and McMinnville school-based health centers already receive this funding. So the additional funding is being awarded by OHA to the Newburgh School-Based Health Clinic. These funds are used for the same types of services we provide through the 50-50 contracts with the schools. The difference is that these funds are from the state, so the school does not need to contribute funding to get the services with us, contribute with us. And the reason I ask this is because in my 4 years of being here, we've seen, unfortunately, numerous suicides, teen suicides, and some unfortunately recently. And I'm very concerned about where parental involvement and parental notification comes into play when you're talking about a school-based health center providing mental health services and crisis services for a teenager who is potentially in crisis. And at what point are the parents notified? Are they notified? How are they notified? What do they know? Because we are the ones providing these services and funding these services. And so the answer to that question is, as far as parental notification involved with services, while a youth 14 and up can consent to their own mental health services, 14 and up can consent to their own mental health services without their parents knowing. The law also says the parent guardian shall be informed as early as possible during the treatment unless there are specific concerns that would pose a safety risk to the youth. Who determines the safety risk? We don't know. So most often, the parent would be aware that counseling is provided to their child. If there was a safety concern for any minor, regardless of age, there is a responsibility to create a safety plan. I don't know if the safety plan involves the parents or not. If there is an imminent risk, such as concern about suicide, the parents are contacted to inform them, and so they can seek transport to the local ED for screening and potential inpatient. If the parent or guardian doesn't think that they can safely transport the youth to the ED, the parent would consent to the transport of the youth by EMS or law enforcement. So my concern is that if we have teenagers going through these programs that we are funding, and for whatever reason, because of state law, parents are not informed or they're not informed soon enough to the point where they cannot take precautions themselves or respond themselves, then I don't feel comfortable with this. And we saw this happen during COVID when we were faced with this experimental vaccine. It was being pushed into the schools. We said, hey, we really want parents to be notified about this, that their kids are being given this. And, you know, the brick wall fell on us from OHA and the Attorney General at the time. So I'm concerned that we are in a position to essentially wall off parents, not because of our own Health and Human Services Department, but because of state law and what state law allows you to do in the state of Oregon. I'm saying I don't necessarily want to be a part of that, because what we've seen are concerns lately, especially, that parents aren't being notified that some of these concerns are happening with their kids, that their kids might be in crisis. And I don't feel good about signing on to something like that. So I think what I would prefer before we consider this is I would like to see some data around not specifically to a child, obviously, but some data around what has been occurring with some of these teens that are receiving mental health crisis counseling. What has been the track record? Are we actually notifying parents? And are there concerns about that?
A couple of things. I think that every time I've had to sign off on a school-based health center allocation, I've always cringed because it has to do with basically what happens at the state. The legislature has determined that the age of medical consent is the age of 14. That means that virtually anything goes and parents don't need to be brought into the discussion. That could do with whether or not it's birth control, abortion referral, mental health counseling, experimental immunizations. Parents don't have to be told. So whether or not, so this really, the argument is with the state. And we have made parents the adversaries here. In other words, that parents don't necessarily have their best children, have their best, the kid's best interest in mind. So it becomes adversarial at the school level. I will say that not approving these is not going to make the mental health counseling not exist in Newburgh. What it's going to do is change the funding stream. So really our issue is, and I've always said this, whether it comes to immunization notifications, whether it comes to exclusion notices, whether it comes to school-based health centers, they were sold to us. And now there's a big push coming from the federal government to fully fund these nationwide, which are very invasive and very expansive, and parents are cut out of the loop. What I will say is that our parents are not aware to any degree that once you send your child at a government school to a government-funded school-based health center with the government funds, the government controls, you have lost that connection in terms of what they're being told, how they're being counseled, and what services are being provided. So it is proceed with caution if your child is going to a school-based health center, because all bets are off. And we've seen it over and over again with whether it's gender affirming care, abortion referrals, and you don't even have to know. So I don't know that we can get that across to our parents. That's basically something that's got to happen at the school board level. It's got to happen in the communities, and folks have to know just what exactly happens once their kid goes into that clinic.
Well, it sounds like there is a safety check. If that these safety plans have to be created, and that if there's imminent risk or concern of suicide, that the parents are contacted. What I'm saying is I want to see the data around that. I want to see that that actually has happened.
And also, if a child expresses concern about, I don't want my parents to know, that's enough. So in other words, virtually, I think every child at some point in their lives, young person says, gee, I don't want my parents to know. And I think that's where the breakdown is, because parents ultimately have the best interests. And of course, you go to a third party and say, I don't want my parents to know. Well, who would want their parents to know? And that's the problem.
Okay, well, I guess for the consideration of this amendment, I would just like to see some further information before, I mean, it sounds like the services will continue, whether I say yes or no, that's not my issue. I want to know that this is actually being followed with data points before I sign off on something that says I'm going to continue to fund this in this way. Because I've seen some red flags recently that indicate that parents are not being informed when there is daily crisis counseling happening with a teenager. And I just am dumbfounded by what I've been hearing.
Agreed. Well, I think maybe we have Director Manfred come and join us next time and answer some of these questions, some of the specifics about what is happening, what are the fail safes, what are the backstops, and what is the limit of our authority when it comes to once it's in the school,
Right.
Who's in charge?
Right.
So
Okay.
thank you for bringing that forward.
I can have her join right now.
Do you? Do you want to?
Well, I don't think she's going to be able to have the data sets
Okay.
right now. So
I mean, if the data exists and it can be, sure. But
What's
I
our
don't-
timeline for this? My
Well-
biggest thing is I don't want this delaying if there's any services in action right now with a school, and this is gonna, in the near term, delay any of that. That would make me,
it sounds like they already have a school-based health center program in Newburgh. It's an expansion of the,
so this is adding to
Mental health
services. This
dollars.
this isn't
This is
funding an
Funding.
existing,
This is funding, different stream of funding.
Correct.
For what's in place.
and it's not something that's existing right now. We are
Yes, it
adding
is.
to,
No. It's a different, someone else is paying for it.
Okay.
OHA is
so this,
paying for it.
okay,
So they pay for it.
okay. That makes me feel better.
Policy
But I
wise.
still don't want to,
Policy-wise.
Schools that are paying for it, and this funding's going to come in to alleviate that requirement.
Right. So we're 50-50.
Correct.
And it's not like it's just going to remove the burden of the funding from the school directly from OHA.
I think
Yeah, I mean, that's.
in the short term, there's no program that is affected by our decision of delaying this.
I'll tell you what was, I reached out to Director Manfred and she said, these funds are allocated by OHA to support the third center, and we have used those expansion funds to go to 2. This goes to the third one directly. So in other
Correct.
words, it's not, we're building up any or expanding any existing program. It's an expansion funding that goes to the third when we've already used ours for just 2.
Okay.
Yeah, because in the director's response was, I was looking for where I was reading that.
I've got one here too. Pam.
Yeah, so this is these funds are from the state, so the school does not need to contribute funding to get these services. And so,
And here's another one. It pays for mental health counselors, drug and alcohol counselors,
Mhm.
skill builders, depending on what we decide is the biggest need in partnership with the school. It's dedicated funding for
Right.
those services tied to the school-based health center.
correct.
But I hear what you're saying, and I think the data would probably be important.
My specific concern is the mental health crisis counseling around suicide and whether or not parents are actually being informed. It's one thing to say the law allows for this. I want to actually see the data that says our parents are being informed, because that's not what I'm hearing.
Okay. Well, if the services are existing, and this has just to do with accepting the expansion funds, then I don't see any reason why we couldn't put it off, see if we can get some data, but that would have to come from the school, not necessarily from Director Manfred. I'm guessing.
Or OHA. But
Why
know.
would they know? Although I will say that I'm on the Mental Health Disability Advisory Committee, and we do after-action reports on any time there's a suicide
Mhm.
completion, anytime there's a suicide attempt, if people have been engaged with our services, but not necessarily with the school services. So some of those we look at and what could we have done differently? But this would actually have to come through the school, and what could they have done differently with their school-based health center staff?
but we are partially funding this.
Yes,
So we should have some lever of accountability and transparency in what is actually occurring. Because
agreed.
nobody else is asking for it.
Agreed.
So at this point, there's no way I cannot step in and ask for this information, given what I've seen and heard.
Okay, I agree.
I agree, but I don't want to see this drag out. This is something that has to happen very soon.
Well, in that it's not changing any of the services that are existing. So it's not like if we don't do it next week, they shut down Newburgh's school-based health center or any of the services there. We do have to find out if there's obviously some concerns about the limitation of accepting these expansion funds and what that limitation is. And if we can wait a week and try to get some data, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Okay, we'll bring it back next week.
Okay.
That was all I had left on this part. Yeah, okay. So there is no public hearing today. And that brings us to announcements. Commissioners, any announcements?
Yes, Commissioner Johnston and I were able to attend a swearing in of 4 new staff members with the Sheriff's Office. We have a sports specialist, Anthony Marabito, Serena Graham, Erica Stepper, 1 enforcement deputy, Josh Brown. It was a nice ceremony. And we also all attended the 3 Mile Lane Bridge dedication, and Commissioner Johnston got a very large photo taken with Mayor Drapkin and ODOT and a community member on the ODOT press release.
They need to sharpen their scissors too.
And they need to show
It took some sawing to get that ribbon cut.
We had our very first local investment advisory committee meeting with our treasurer, Paulette Alexandria. She's hit the ground running. We appreciate that. Was able to go over to Newburgh Animal Shelter and just take a look at what's going on, because we do have that new expanded contract with them. I have to say the shelter manager, Pam Harrison, and board president, Kay Finley, and their staff and volunteers really have their heart in this work. It's very difficult, very heartbreaking to see animals who have been abused and neglected and have been dumped and starved. And these are people who live this heartbreaking work every single day. We're looking at ways we can streamline it with the sheriff's office in terms of licensing, making it easier to license, increasing licensing revenue. So that's an ongoing discussion. And I also want to mention earlier, I believe I had mentioned that DMV was self-reporting on their, sounds like the chili cook-off is in full swing next door, the assessor's office. That I mentioned that DMV was the one that was saying, hey, we found these discrepancies in our data. Well, that's apparently not true. Just received from information that said apparently the Institute of Responsive Government in Chicago, Illinois, basically looked at looked at Oregon's voting situation and said, you got a problem here. So it wasn't like DMV came forward and came clean. You've got outside agencies taking a look at Oregon's voter situation, and it's concerning. Fortunately, our clerk is on top of it, so grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We did a Yamhill water tour, City of Yamhill water tour last Friday.
Yep.
Which was great, very well attended. Everyone from their fire department to
Citizens. Mhm.
to city councilors and governor's office and business
Council
Oregon.
candidates. Yeah, everybody. Yeah.
Everybody was there, it seemed like. And just those things are wonderful because, you sit there for an hour and have a discussion with everybody around the table, and, they figured out funding sources and potential plans going forward, and they're pretty much at a crisis level of needs. So we were happy to help where we can there. Mac Fire Breakfast was awesome, very well attended. And I was, how many rounds did you guys do with the fire trucks? I sat there for a while and watched that. The kids were loving it. The line was
The
super
line was-
long.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So that was great. And great breakfast there. And then the Willamina ropes team. So we went out to Grand Ron Fire and did a ropes demo with their new team, which was funded in part by the SIP agreement. And we thought it was just for equipment, but it was actually for training
The
as well,
ongoing training,
because
yeah.
it's so technical. You have to have so many people trained to operate that equipment, and just highly technical as well. So that was a lot of fun to see how they use the equipment, and Commissioner Johnston rappelled out of the second story window and
Saw a picture of that.
safely got
Yeah,
down.
and I denounced the photo that has been photoshopped. I'm going to say it's been photoshopped.
I saw that, and I don't
Big
know. about
blonde
that.
braid coming out of the second
Like
window
we're
attached to my head.
Let down your hair.
Yes,
That was a great picture.
denounced.
Denied.
That was-
Yeah. I think that's all my announcements.
Yep.
Busy week, busy time.
Yep.
All right, anything else for the good of the order? Okay, and just a reminder, we have an executive session after we finish here. So if there's nothing else, I will adjourn the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal session for October 17th, 2024. It